So, living an automatic life, or a life on automatic, is a big danger, isn't it? You know, we just get up in the morning and do what we've always done without thinking why we're doing it. You know, and because we've received so much conditioning from our families, from our social institutions, from the media, from our friends, then, you know, and we've just bought into this conditioning indiscriminately because we didn't know any better. And we've never really thought about the conditioning to see if it's true or not true. Then we just go ahead with it. Yeah. And just do what we think other people think we should do. Which is basically have a good time, have as much pleasure, get as much worldly popularity, success, love, sex, money, and rock and roll as you possibly can in this life, and forget about everything else because it doesn't exist. And other beings, well, care for them a little bit so you don't look like you're totally selfish, but, you know, really don't waste your time because they're not worth it. Is that right? Yeah? So, you know, this is the mold that we're trying to break out of when we practice Dharma, and particularly when we're considering ordination or living as a monastic. You know, to really live a life with purpose, where we have thought out, you know, what is the meaning of my life? What is the value of my life? What are the possibilities in my life? Not just worldly possibilities, but really the possibility that our Buddha nature provides. You know? And so we've thought about these things, and then with some kind of clear wisdom, you know, we've made some decisions and some choices about how we want to live, what we want to do, what we don't want to do. You know? And those choices have been made out of wisdom, with thought, not just out of emotion, not out of peer pressure, not out of because that's what all my friends are doing, or because somebody else is telling me to do it. You know, not out of fear, but out of wisdom and compassion for ourselves and others. Yeah. And so that kind of intentional life is very beautiful. And what it leads to is, at the time of death, we have no regrets. Yeah. Because we've known what we're doing and why we're doing it. And even if we can't control every event we encounter in life, because the idea of controlling the outside world is a fantasy. So, you know, although we can't get our duckies all lined up so that everything externally turns out the way we want, an intentional life, our own internal intention of how I am going to greet whatever appears before me. Okay? So we can't control whether we get sick, you know, aging, death, we have problems or not have problems. A lot of this stuff is beyond our control. It's, you know, in the hands of previous karma. And not that that's can do a lot of purification, but, you know, thinking that we can arrange the world and make everybody do and be what we want them to be, it's not possible. Okay? But if we have an intention, you know, when I am criticized, this is the way I'm going to respond. When trust has been betrayed, this is the way I'm going to respond. When I'm old or sick, this is the way I'm going to respond. You know? And we practice those ways when we aren't getting criticized, when we're still young and healthy, you know. And so then when events come, we know what to do. And we know why to do it. And we're setting our intention on how to interact with the people around us. But the people around me are not simply pawns that I should be able to rearrange so that I can get what I want. They aren't just things, objects in the way that I have to knock out of the way so I can get to where I'm going and get the pleasure I want. That these are living beings with feelings just like me, and they want to be happy and don't want to suffer just like me. And that's how I'm going to relate to them. Whether it's somebody I like or don't like, whether they're in a human body or an itty-bitty insect. So we make that kind of intention, and then it isn't sufficient just to make the intention, because we have so much of the bad habits, so many of the bad habits in our mind, that we need to keep setting the intention again and again, and doing the meditations that enable us to transform so that those intentions become less intellectual and heartfelt. At the beginning, but if you do them a while, then they and so, we can be extremely busy. It's possible to live a very busy, and yet your whole life is lived on automatic. Because you're busy doing this and doing that, doing this and doing that. Because that's what you were brought up to do. And then we feel imprisoned by other people's conceptions, by their expectations of us, and we just feel, well, it's just easier to people remain incredibly busy, yet success. You can climb up the ranks of whatever, occupation you're in. You can have monetary success and love and get all tangled up. So, it really behooves us to sit and think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I've always had the feeling since I was little that I don't want to die with regret, because I sensed something in my dad especially that, that he regrets some decision in his life. I think I finally figured out what it was. It took me a long time. But anyway, I thought, I don't want to die like that with regret. And if I do make bad decisions and do create a mess, then, again, with an intentionality and with a good motivation, I want to learn from the experience, so that I don't do it again. Because, we all have bad experiences, don't we? And then most people don't learn from them and repeat them. And so you'll see this in relationships. A lot. Somebody will be attracted to a certain kind of person that is not good for them. They don't have a good kind of relationship. They separate from that person, and they find another person with the same kind of dynamic and personality, and they recreate the same, dysfunctional dynamic. So instead of learning from the first one and looking inside and saying, okay, this was a mess. Not all of it is due to me. It involves multiple people. But what was my part in this? And what can I do to change that part in me so that I don't repeat the same thing? Yeah. And in that way we learn from the mistakes that we've made. When I was saying yesterday that in terms of emotional things, the ones that I feared the most kind of all happened together, and it all kind of poured down. And one thing that I did while that was happening, kind of after first I went into my usual dynamic of let's throw a pity party with my lead balloons. But I know my habit to do that, and so I stopped it, and I said, oh, it's good this is happening. Yeah. Instead of saying, I don't like this situation, it's horrible, I'm a failure, I can't stand this, I said, oh, it's very good this is happening. Yeah. It's very good this person, this trust was betrayed. It's very good that, I'm looking like an idiot in front of people. It's very good that all this stuff happened. Because, and once I said to myself, it's very good, then I could really learn from it. Yeah. And I could really say, oh, yeah, it's making me more humble. It's making me more compassionate. Yeah. And I'm seeing what I did wrong. And, And so, when we greet disagreeable circumstances, instead of battling them and say, oh, it's good this is happening, because now I have an opportunity to learn. And then just that change in our mind itself completely changes our experience of the situation. Yeah. If you say, I'm glad it's happening, but I can't wait for that motivation to change the experience of the situation so I'm not suffering so much, then, you're not really glad it's happening. Okay, but the whole idea is, to really learn and grow and live with a good intention. Okay, so speaking of intention, in the story of the Buddha's life, there's one character named Mara. So Mara is actually some being from one of the God realms, but he, plays the role of, you can look at it as an external being in the God realms who comes and is creating havoc, or you can look at him as a representation of our own inner afflictions, of anger and jealousy and attachment and so on, all welling up inside of us. Okay? So, Mara, the personification of evil, comes to visit the Bodhisattva. So at one point the Buddha says, monastics, Mara is continually, ceaselessly hovering around you, thinking, perhaps I'll get an opportunity by means of the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body. Perhaps I'll get an opportunity by means of the mind. Thus, monastic, you should dwell with the doors to your senses well guarded. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Mara will get an opportunity by means of the eye, the ear, nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. Yeah. Those are our 6 sense doors. And that's how we know external objects. Yeah. So the whole cycle of our afflictions begins with contacting external objects. It actually begins with our birth in samsara due to ignorance, you know. But first there's the external object. We contact it. Yeah. We get a certain feeling. We interpret the experience, and then affliction arises in our mind. So we have to, when it said guard our senses, to be very aware of what we're perceiving and the effect of that object on our mind. And then also to make wise decisions about what we want to perceive and cognize and what we don't. Okay? This is one of the reasons for many of the precepts in that monastics have, is we're making a conscious decision not to engage with certain external objects, because we know our own minds get out of control when we're around those objects. Or we're making decisions to moderate our contact with certain objects because we know our mind simply goes bananas. So it's not a thing of escaping from an evil external world. It's a thing of recognizing our own capabilities at any particular time in our practice. And with wisdom, knowing that we're not going to put ourselves in situations where our afflictions overpower us. And by not putting ourselves in those situations, we're not just going to sit around and enjoy the temporary peace of mind of not having our buttons pushed, but we're going to do our practice in a really solid way so that we can integrate the antidotes to those afflictions into our mind stream, so that then when we do have contact with those objects, our mind doesn't go ballistic. Okay? So we're not running away from things. We're temporarily taking a break so that we can deepen our wisdom, deepen our mindfulness and our introspective awareness, so that then, you know, our mind is able to we can manage our mind better. Okay? So one of the chief ways this manifests in monastic life is we're celibate. Yeah? Clearly, sexual desire is the biggest one in our lives. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah? I mean, that's the strongest one. It completely overpowers us. Yeah? And we make all sorts of decisions under the influence of sexual desire. And then we have to live with the consequences of it afterwards. Yeah? And our mind really gets totally uncontrolled. Yeah? In many different ways. Yeah? So by choosing to remain celibate, then you're saying, okay, I'm not going to get involved with that. Yeah? And there's going to be some distance between me and the objects of my attachment. Yeah? So that's why we don't go up and give big bear hugs to people of the opposite sex. Or if you're gay, give big bear hugs to people of your own sex. You know? But we create some space in there so that our attachment doesn't get inflamed, because we know what it's like when our attachment's inflamed. Don't we? Yeah. Think about the decisions you've made under the influence of sexual desire. Yeah. We usually just think it's, it's the decision to sleep with that person. That's not the only decision we make under the influence of sexual desire. Yeah, that's one of them. That's not the main one. Okay? Because by the power of that desire, then you how you dress, what you do, how you walk, how you use your eyes, where you go, how you speak, what you speak about. Yeah, we're all professionals at that, aren't we? You know? We know how to attract somebody. And we just go all out with it. Yeah. And then, of course, you know, you get the object of your desire, and you want to possess them, and it's the relationship. Yeah. So then you have to support them. And you have to have a house. And you're going to have kids. That's what happens. Yeah. So then you have to get a job. And you have to work many, many long hours every day to get the money to support the object of your sexual and emotional attraction. You know, support the house. Support. And it's not just feeding the kids, you know. The kids want to go to summer camp. They want Nike shoes. They want, you know, all the little gadgets that all their friends have. Yeah. And your spouse, he or she wants this, that, the other. And you have to have a certain social life. Yeah. So you have to spend a lot of time in that social life, doing certain things, going to their family, going to your family, going to their friends, going to your friends. Yeah. Your spouse does that you do, so you can't do everything you like, and you have they like. Remember, I had one friend, and her husband loved Civil War history. To me, that's a little bit more interesting than golf. But, you know, you think of it, and you have to do these things, and, you know, to maintain the relationship, to have the object of your sexual desire. Yeah. And maintaining a relationship takes a lot of energy. It isn't just that you fall in love and live happily ever after. Yeah, it takes so much energy because they love you intensely at the beginning because their mind's overwhelmed by attachment. And then when they see all of our bad habits, then they start picking at us. Don't they? Oh, you don't have any bad habits? So your lovers don't pick at you? And they don't have any bad habits, so you don't pick at them? So when, you know, what was this romantic thing to start out with, you know, now we are picking at each other over tiny things. But that doesn't matter because the tiny things are indicative of huge, meaningful things. Yeah. I always talk about the divorce that happened because of the peanut butter. Honey, there's no peanut butter for breakfast today. I asked you to buy the peanut butter. Well, I bought peanut butter. It's right there. Honey, that's the creamy peanut butter. I wanted the chunky peanut butter. Listen, it's peanut butter. Just eat it, okay? Why are you talking to me in that tone of voice? You know, I trusted you to get that peanut butter. And this is your duty in our relationship. You know, it was your turn to... And I asked you to get that peanut butter, and you're just acting like this whenever I ask you a question in a nice tone of voice. What do you mean, nice tone of voice? Well, what in the world? What's going on here? You know, look, I got the beep, beep, beep peanut butter, and it's right there in front of you. Eat it. You know I don't like creamy peanut butter, and I like chunky peanut butter. And you got the butter deliberately because you don't really care about me. And you're retaliating for this fight that we had 5 years ago. And you're just doing this deliberately to get to me. And that's why there's this creamy peanut butter. am not retaliating. But you know, it might be a good idea considering the way you've always treated me. You know, and the other one says, you know, this is just totally indicative of our relationship. You're so aggressive. Say sweet things and then you stab me behind your back. This is a divorce. Yeah, you'll get one. That's what happens, isn't it? Yeah? Yeah? That's what happens. Because to maintain a relationship, you have to really work at it. And sometimes we get the angriest and say the meanest, cruelest things to the people we care the most about. You know? And then there it goes. And it all starts out with sexual desire. Doesn't it? Yeah. Starts out with that initial attraction to somebody. And then you get involved in this and that and the other thing, and and you're fighting over whose parents you go to, and you're fighting over whether the kids have this, that, or the other thing. Yeah. And then the whole life goes by like that. The whole life goes by like that. How many people do you know who have happy relationships? Yeah. And even the relationships that appear on the outside to be happy, we don't know what really goes on when they're alone. Yeah. So, this is one example of why we keep our distance from certain objects, because our mind just gets out of control. Yeah. I mean, sexual desire is and people kill each other because of it. And look at all the domestic violence things that happen. You kill the person you love because they're looking at somebody else. Yeah. Or what happened to John's colleague in Boise, a lawyer who's defending his secretary who's getting divorced, by the way, sleeping with her. He's a father of 5 kids, but never mind. He's married and a father of 5 kids, but sleeping with his secretary, helping her get a divorce from her husband, and the husband kills him in the parking lot of a Walmart. I mean, this is, we look shocked, but this happens. I mean, this kind of domestic violence, especially with the guns all over the country, it happens quite a lot. So, when you trace it back, it starts with that sexual attachment, desire. Yeah, so that's why monastics are celibate. Yeah, so, yeah, it's problem prevention. Yeah, so, and then, regulating, the precepts regulate all sorts of other things in our life to moderate the attachment so that we don't get in big problems. Yeah, because as soon as we're close to an object of attachment, our mind's crazy. Yeah, I mean, you may have noticed when we took precepts how often during the day the mind wants to eat. Yeah, the body's not hungry, the mind wants to eat. And if we're in front of something, then, the attachment just comes up, and it's like, bye-bye reason and logic, Forget my cholesterol, forget the threat of diabetes, forget how uncomfortable it feels to be overweight, forget everything. I want this now, And that's the mind of attachment, isn't it? And it runs our life. So it happens with food, it happens with money, yeah, with social status, with popularity, with all sorts of different things. Yeah. So a monastic life is very much designed to restrict the contact we have with our senses, yeah, so that we have space to really examine how our senses operate, how we relate to objects of the senses, how we interpret the stimuli from the object of our senses, how the objects are impermanent, how they're unsatisfactory in nature, how there's no truly existent I that is experiencing them, how the feelings of pain and pleasure are dependent arising and they don't last. Yeah? So it gives us the space to examine these things in our practice and thus develop the wisdom so that we no longer will be controlled by these kinds of attachments, ignorance and anger. Okay, is that making some sense? So this is, one of the reasons. There's many reasons behind having precepts, but this is one of them. Okay? So we're voluntarily choosing to do this. Same with music. Yeah, music, dancing, all these things that, we take refuge in. That we use to feel good, that we use for comfort, that we, that we're attached to, that distract us. And so we're cutting out a lot of those things so that we have first of all, we don't have the problems that arise from those kind of attachments or anger. And second of all, we have more time and space to really investigate how those things operate and to really overcome them. Okay? So that's an important thing to understand. We're not trying to take the joy out of life. We're trying to bring joy into the life. Yeah. And then you hear people say, but you need pain in order to know joy. And I always say, yeah, that sounds good whenever you're okay. But when you're in pain, do you say, I need this in order to know happiness? No, you don't say that. But sometimes there's a fear. We have a fear of, if I don't have so much attachment and interaction with all these sense objects, then my life is going to be so boring. And where's all the pizzazz going to come from? Because we all want some pizzazz, don't we? Huh? Give me some pizzazz. I can't listen to music, then I can't go. I can't dance, and I can't sing, and I can't express myself. I'm all tied up in knots inside. And I can't paint my modern art and do this, and I can't go skiing down the slopes and playing hockey and playing basketball and racquetball and golf. My dad was a golfer. That's where my fondness for golf came. Or tennis. It's like my life is so narrow and confined. And what do I talk to people about? I can't watch the same, programs that they do. I can't go to the movies. I can't. This is prison. Yeah. If you have that idea, better not to ordain. Yeah, because there's no understanding behind that, and you're going to be completely miserable. Yeah. But if you understand, what you're trying to do in your life and why you're trying to do it, and what are good circumstances and what aren't, and how you moderate these different things, you know, and that yes, you can see documentary films, that's okay, and you know, yes, you can do some sports, keep your body healthy, that's okay, but sorry, you can't go to the beach half naked. That's not going to work if you're celibate. So, you know, you begin to understand these things and see how they work to really help your mind. Okay? And when you do that, then Mara doesn't have a door to enter and stir you up. Okay? Gee, I wasn't going to talk so long about that one paragraph. Any questions about this? Yeah.
I just have a comment. At the last beauty meditation class, we were talking about when people take refuge in. And there's this place that people get concerned that when they start, like there was one person in the group that really takes her refuge when she's having a hard day, difficult in books. She says she's a bookaholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so then she went from, you know, not doing that, and then she felt that she was oppressing and denying. Does that mean that I can't read it all? I mean, we kind of flip to this other extreme.
Yes.
Without trying to go in and saying, well, what we want you to do is just to ask why you need to do that. You know, why do you go there? What's underneath the need?
Mm-hmm.
But she was really she had a confused look on her face. Well, she really thought she was going to have to sacrifice one of the greatest treasures of her life.
Right. Yeah. People tend to do that, to really go to extremes. It's like, oh, you know, like, oh, I do this out of attachment, therefore I can't do anything. Yeah. Without seeing that, well, actually it's good to read books, but choose the books you read wisely. Yeah. And don't read murder mysteries and love stories and stuff like that. But yeah, it's very common, people completely going to extremes like that. Are there comments or questions? Yeah.
This is just a comment. I had a voicing we were talking about something to do with the topic, and what I find, which is also a big issue for me, and now I find it very difficult to describe what the alternative is. If we think the only way we have pleasure is through the intensity of the senses, you know, to try to imagine there's some other way to be happy is really hard to come up with. And so now I have the experience that you absolutely are more happy, way more happy. But how to describe that within the world that is totally fixed on sense pleasures being the only way that we have any pleasure whatsoever. Thank you very much. Don't take this away from me or I'll die. That kind of mind, you know, it's just very hard to describe.
Yeah. Yeah, so how to describe the other kind of happiness and inner joy that comes that is not reliant on sense pleasure to people who are completely clutching their sense pleasure and totally fearful of it being taken away from them. Yeah. When people are in that kind of state of mind, yeah, then they aren't really open to any new ideas. So you have to somehow, you know, help them to soften that state of mind, and don't worry, you know, you can still eat food and you still talk to your friends, and you know, you still have relationships, and you can still read books, you can still do all these things, but you know, try, you know, see if those things really bring you ultimate satisfaction or not. You know? And then look at the lives of some of the people you admire, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who doesn't have those things. And does he look like he's suffering? You know? Well, no, he doesn't. Well, but he's a refugee. He's, you know, had to leave his homeland and his house and everything, and he's not suffering? You know, what's he doing, do you think? And then see, oh, well, you know, there's something coming through because of his inner state of Dharma practice and how he's perceiving the world and how he's, you know, prioritized things in his life and how he's found meaning, so that there's, you know, people who find different paths to happiness that rely on internal things. Yeah. So you kind of have to describe it that way. I remember at one big lecture when one of these people said, but you have to know suffering to know happiness. And His Holiness said, well, I try and not know too much happiness, and then I, sense happiness, and then I don't know too much suffering. So my life might be a little bit more flatter, great English, a little bit flatter emotionally, not so many emotional ups and downs, but actually, it's a lot more peaceful that way. Yeah? Yeah, so it doesn't mean you no longer have emotions. You still have emotions. But, for those of us who are theatrical around our emotions, like Venerable Senke and me, our emotions are like, then it's just like, let's just smooth things out. It's okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, actually, that was something that I've been noticing the last couple of years is that there's that flattening out of that roller coaster of emotions. There's been one where actually I was missing that.
Yeah.
I was so addicted to that up and down, up and down, up and down. It's like I felt that there was nothing going on in my life.
Yep.
Nothing.
Yep.
The value of the dead.
Yeah. 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 When you're somebody, maybe three of us form a little club here, maybe there's some other participants too, But we make such a big deal out of our emotions. And then when things start to become smoother, it's like, what's happening? Like you said, because we're so attached to our emotions, to pleasure and pain, and the depth of what we're feeling, which is the most meaningful thing in the world, and what I obsess about day and night, my feelings. Then we, feel like what's happening. But then you realize, oh, actually, there's a lot more space and there's a lot more peace. Yeah? And that all this theater around my feelings is it's not necessary. It's unnecessary. Yeah, I'm feeling this. That's nice. Yeah, I'm feeling that. That's nice. Yeah. So I got an email recently from another friend who, is trying to separate from some objects of attachment, but sometimes he, and just kind of do more Dharma study and everything, but sometimes he just can't take it. And he wants to play hockey, and he wants to ride his bike, and he's riding his bike 35 miles down an hour down these roads and, almost getting killed and saying, I love this adrenaline rush. So some people, their addiction is to the adrenaline rush. Let's do something exciting that's a little bit dangerous. Then I have the adrenaline and wow, I feel like I'm so alive. Yeah. And then for those people, the idea of not having their daily dose of adrenaline is then their life is boring. And some people, as painful as it is, they love fighting. Yeah, they love fighting. When their relationship is going well, they can't stand it. Yeah? No, seriously. In fact, some of us might be those kinds of people where, if the relationship is going okay, it's boring. They don't love me anymore. So you stir something up. You create some drama in the relationship, because then when you fight and you engage and you make up and then something's happening, then you feel alive. And so some people are addicted to that kind of thing. Totally painful and miserable. Yeah. That's kind of like, doing dangerous things too, because you you love the adrenaline rush, but one day you wind up in the hospital. So, what we start to uncover through our Dharma practice is all these kinds of habitual ways of acting. And we, stop and go, what am I doing? And why am I doing this? And what kind of effect is it having on my life? And what are alternatives? Not an alternative that's imposed from the outside. Not that Buddha's standing there saying, you should not live with so much attachment. You should cut off the attachment to your adrenaline and rush. If you think of the Buddha that way, criticizing you, it's not going to work. Yeah. But if you look and just say, what kind of alternatives are there in my life? And, what do I want to choose? And what's going to be, in the long term, the best for myself and others? Okay. Other questions, comments? Yeah?
One other comment about that from one of the sutras that Buddha said. It wasn't really an explanation of that inner happiness, but an analogy that just helped me to kind of see that it's possible. Is that he said, someone, I think it was specifically talking like the bliss of the body, but any spiritual happiness. Trying to describe it to someone, concept of sense pleasures is like trying to describe to someone who's only eaten bitter and sour foods their whole life, and that's all you've been accustomed to describe to them the taste of honey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, that's one of the passages later on in here when the Buddha stopped his ascetic practice. Yeah, and then he started practicing the jhanas, the meditative stabilizations, and experienced very intense bliss, and then a feeling of equanimity, which is more delightful even than the bliss and the rapture. But comparing them to sense pleasure and saying that they're so different. Yeah, they're so different, and that this is an internal piece that comes from learning to concentrate the mind. So on one level, the Buddha's saying to people, leave the attachment to sense pleasure and look at the bliss that comes from meditative stabilization. And then he also says, but don't get attached to that bliss of meditative stabilization, because it alone is not liberation. You also need wisdom. Yeah. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left here. So the Buddha also says to Mara, in me are conviction, austerity, persistence, wisdom. Why, when I'm so resolute, do you petition me in this way? Because the Mara earlier in the passage had petitioned the Buddha to live, but live a sensual life. So the Buddha says, as my blood dries up, gall and phlegm dry up. As muscles waste away, the mind grows clearer, mindfulness, wisdom, concentration stand more firm. Staying in this way, attaining the ultimate feeling, the mind has no interest in sensual passions. Okay? In other words, don't ask me to get involved in sensual passions when, I'm willing for my body, to dry up, and I don't really care so much what happens to my body because I'm putting my mind in another direction. So although the Buddha is speaking like this in a very, sometimes, in a way that seems quite extreme, I'm willing for my blood and phlegm to dry up, and we go, I'm not. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you actually get your body to that state, because clearly if you do, you're not going to be able to practice. But what it's indicative of is I'm letting go of attachment to my body so that, I'm not concerned with that kind of thing. Yeah, whenever you hear those kind of extreme statements, don't take them literally. Okay, so then he goes into this very interesting thing of talking to Mara and identifying for Mara what Mara's armies are. So he says, sensual passions are your first army. But Mara sends out first. All of our sensual passions. Food, smell, taste, touch, all these things. Okay? And we get hooked, don't we? We get hooked. Okay? Your second is called discontent. It's another one of Mara's armies. I can't get what I want. Yeah, I'm discontent. That's a really painful state of mind, and that's all caused by attachment. Yeah. Your third army is hunger and thirst. This doesn't mean just physical hunger and thirst. It includes that, but it means hunger and thirst for sensual objects. Yeah, it's like, as I've heard people say, as soon as the retreat's over and I go down to town, I'm ordering a steak.
Or a double latte.
Yeah, double latte, something, whatever it is, okay? So that kind of, craving. And then it says your fourth army is called craving. I want. Your fifth army is called drowsiness and dullness. Let's go take a nap. Let's go take a snooze. Yeah. That's joy, to be able to sleep. And you aren't even awake to enjoy it. And then interesting, Mara's sixth army is terror. Yeah. And I think terror, fear, we talked about this yesterday, a lot of it is based on attachment. Also, in thinking about the discussion yesterday on fear, I think that what some people was not so much fear as what they don't like. So really check the thing, like if I could use applesauce. Yeah, I assume the same. So to differentiate a little bit between not liking something and being afraid of it. A little bit different. Okay. But, terror, some people live not so much in terror, but in anxiety and fear most of their lives. And that's one of Mara's armies, because it's very difficult to practice when you're anxious. Yeah. Your seventh army is uncertainty or doubt. Should I do this? Maybe I shouldn't. Should I do this meditation? Maybe that meditation's better. Should I read this book and study this topic? Maybe I better do that one. Okay, so uncertainty, doubt. Trying to go forward with a two-pointed needle and you don't go anywhere. Yeah. We had a great skit some years ago. Remember the turkey on the fence skit? Yeah. Thanksgiving is coming and you're a turkey sitting on the fence. Doubt. Yeah. Okay. Hypocrisy and stubbornness are your eighth army. Yeah, so hypocrisy. We don't present ourselves clean clear. We act one way, do another thing. Okay. Stubbornness. Stubborn? Maybe they're not. But you can be stubborn about your hypocrisy. Stubbornly hypocritical. But, we can be stubborn. Somebody gives us some instruction. I don't think that's right. I'm going to do it my way. It's very interesting here at the Abbey to watch this. When people dig in their heels, you kind of give them, please do this. Well, I don't think that's the right way to do it. I want to do it this way. And sometimes it happens over these tiny things. Yeah? And people are just like, my identity as a human being is dependent upon, which container I pack the food in after lunch. So don't tell me to use this other container. Yeah. And we get so stubborn over certain things. Ego gets involved with all sorts of stuff. Okay. Gains, offerings, fame, and status wrongly gained, and whoever would praise self and disparage others. That's another army. Okay? So seeking gains and offerings, fame, and status. If you're a monastic, this is this can be a challenge, In Western culture, it's not so bad, but it can be that way if you have a group of supporters that has a lot of faith and really wants to please you. And, in the East, people have a lot of faith and want to do this. And so it's very easy to get attached to gains and offerings. And, my benefactors should supply me with this. This is what I like. This is what I want. Give me more. Or choosing the places you go to teach according to how much offerings the people give you. I think this is a big challenge for lay Dharma teachers, who have to support their family because they need an income, but they need places that give a lot of money. So then only the rich people get the Dharma. So easy to get attached to that kind of thing and to make decisions. Praising ourselves, belittling others, I'm the best Dharma teacher around. Don't go to those teachers. They don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. So there's all sorts of ways, even when one is a monastic, that attachment to gain and praise and reputation can take root in a really insidious way that we have to be very careful about. Okay. I think that's it for today. Questions about that last part? Yeah.
Given that you're monastic, that you have to teach, or if you're monastic, is that
this is a good question.
or kind of just off?
Yeah. So is it a given that if you're a monastic you have to teach? No. No. Yeah. For some people, teaching isn't interesting to them, or they don't have skill in it. You don't ordain as a monastic in order to have a teaching career. If you have the intention to make your monastic life an avenue for a career, then your motivation. We ordain because we realize that we're stuck in samsara and we want to get out. And so our first job is learning and practicing the Dharma. And that's what we do. Yeah. Learning and practicing the Dharma, transforming our mind. That's why we get ordained. That's our primary job. Okay. Now, as it happens, sometimes people have questions. They want to learn the Dharma. They ask you. Out of compassion, you share. But if you think, oh, I'm going to be a great Dharma teacher, And, so you learn a little bit for the purpose of becoming a Dharma teacher, and then you tell people, oh, now I've studied this and I've studied that, so I can come teach you if you invite me. No. No, that's not how it's done. Okay? Some people who ordain are really, they much prefer to meditate. They aren't so hot on teaching. Other people prefer to teach, Other people allocate their time in both ways. There's other monastics that, they primarily serve the community and do work in the community. There's other monastics who are doing social work. Yeah? So, and you can change which activity you're doing at different times in your practice. It's not like a Catholic order where you ordain in a social service order and then you're going to teach or you're going to work in a hospital until your last day. It's not like that. Yeah. So we can do different things at different times in our life. But those things are the secondary thing. The main thing to do is our study and practice. Because without study and practice, everything else just becomes dry and meaningless. Yeah. So people shouldn't feel pushed to teach, because it's not in everybody's personality. Anything else? Okay, then let's dedicate.